Hello, this is the Aubrey Light. I'm Mary. I give a conservative perspective about the world around me. Feedback is immensely important. Feel free to reach out to me. 2 ways to do this is email and YouTube. Word of mouth really helps. And I appreciate all the listeners. And if you feel like my content would be interesting to a co-worker, to a friend, loved one, what have you, tell them about the Aubrey Light. Alright, so on to the topic of choice here. So I'm going to break this up. So I'm going to give my thoughts about the aspects of the beginning of what comics can come to be, and then give some more examples, and then I'm going to wrap it up and give more specific examples, and then extend out about comics on Wednesday. With that said, let's jump right into the pages. Here we go. Alright, so comics initially started out as strips, comic strips, and then something with the UK with penny dreadfuls, from what I understand. And initially, what it was giving illustrations, about everyday life. It was very interesting when we get in the aspects of penny dreadfuls and the aspects of the Victorian area type of style of comics or strips, as you can say, that was coming around that time. Because specifically when we get into Britain and UK aspects of everything when it comes to comics, the Victorian era is really, it reigns itself in as the what to look for as the standard. And what I mean by that is, it was initiated with purity was what was the focal point of moral discussion or examples in entertainment, and in this case in the aspects of penny dreadfuls and stuff like and commentary like that. So as far as lewdness and everything else, that was frowned upon, because with Queen Victoria and everything else with that, it was centered around the aspects of you must restrain, you must be, you must have chastity within yourself, to a point to some people took it to the aspects of merely, this is just from my point of view, of being what's the best way to describe it, imperialistic with it, and which unfortunately is what happens a lot when it is the consensus of something that you just should typically have about you with your discourse and your day-to-day life, or your thoughts about the world in general. You should have just common decency. But some people, that's unfortunate. That's the way of the world. That some people take it to the extreme, take it to the next level, and not understanding, the middle ground with all of that. And so, a lot of interesting commentary came out during this time. And, specifically when it comes with not skate or trying to skate around or finding creative ways in which to be appropriate or inappropriate. And when we look to the comics were initially something where, testing waters, is this going to be, something that's going to be very entertaining to adults? Because initially adults are the ones who have the buying power of everything. So let's see where if it's interesting or not. And it wasn't really these strips were not really interesting in the aspects of adults, because it was more interesting to children in the fact of how it was illustrated. And with what today with animation, getting along lines with animation and other things of that nature. But needless to say that there weren't comics or penny dreadfuls that were not interesting to adults. There were. It's just it had to be a lot of different layers to it, and which makes a lot of sense to why and how comics were able to be transferable and grow a lot of attention each generation that it has expanded and that it continues to expand. Because comics are a medium of looking inward, looking outward, and then pulling that inward, and then changing and evolving to what the audience is asking for. And I think really good examples of this growing up, the Peanuts, and then I'll get into other specifics about comics, and then I'll talk more about the aspects of the British with the penny dreadfuls and stuff, and add on to that on Wednesday, and then go on with other more modern aspects of comics. Okay, so the Peanuts character. Now that's something Schwartz, he was really strategic, and it was really interesting in the way in which he developed these characters. Now these kids initially were making a lot of commentary about the aspects in which the disposition that there is between parenting and how children see adults, and how what does that mean to their everyday life. And it's also interesting when you add in a layer of fan theories when it comes to these characters, when it comes to Peanuts, because initially it started out as a comic strip, and then it became what it is now. And so, some people have the disposition that, that these children, they position themselves in the way that it is because it's supposed to be a means to say, well, this is how children really think and feel and about different situations that they don't quite understand. And some people have the theory that, well, maybe it's an extra layer to that maybe they're geniuses or something like this, and this is all an experiment to see how well adjusted they can be in normal situations. So that's why I was saying, it's interesting when fan theories get are involved with well-established means of entertainment. And Charlie Brown, he really, is a focal point of being honest with the aspects of transitioning from child to, understanding how to be sensitive, and then understanding how to relate to other kids, and then what does that mean for him. And a really good example of that is when he talks about the redhead, the girl that he has a crush on. It's very reflective into the aspects of making a lot of commentary about how vulnerability can, be very relatable to children, because they're so young, they don't know how to adjust and adapt to situations they're unfamiliar with. And it takes a lot of care and understanding for parents to help them see and think and work out their feelings that they don't understand or know. But at the same time, it's hard being a kid because of how other kids might think and feel, and not being very sensitive, or not having a sense of being understanding of other things because they're kids. And those focal points were really illustrated a lot, pun intended, in that comic. And I think that's why it relates to a lot of not only to children but to adults and everything, because a lot of people can reflect and think back to those days when they were children and how they felt, or certain situations. And it makes a whole lot of sense why it came back. You got let's go back to the specials, and then you got the television series and so forth, why it just became so successful. Now, I'm trying to think. I keep my track of thought here. Now, Kathy. All right, so in Doonesbury, so Kathy was really interesting because that was essentially, which is funny, because Caroline in the City, if I'm not mistaken, now y'all who know more about that or so forth, it was very reminiscent to me, from my point of view, of those Kathy strips, coming to life. But the Caroline character, she wasn't struggling with her weight. She was fit, petite, and everything else. So that's the only layer that doesn't, relate to Kathy. But the Kathy strips, let's get back to it, was a lot of commentary, about the aspects of what it's like to be a woman, a single woman, trying to make it in the modern age, right? And then, also on top of that layer is, how to maneuver about when you don't meet those expectations, because there were so many examples in that strip where it was making it was obvious it was making a lot of commentary where, my body isn't good enough, so what do I do? And the self-loathing thing, and that was a lot of commentary about the aspects of diet culture and everything else. When the transition of the 80s and the 90s, and specifically of making a lot of commentary about that, this is what I see from my point of view. And for y'all, feel free to give me comments about that, or email me. And because in the 80s and 90s, that was the time where all these different fads were coming about, and people were being more and more self-conscious about the way that they look and their health. And it was more acceptable and more appropriate for people to be trying to figure out, what's my calorie intake, reading nutrition labels, and then on the dark side of it, being accessible to what's the next fad with dieting, instead of being more disciplined and understanding that it's not really, that's the issue with fads. You don't. It's easy to get lost into that if you don't have a mind of your own, and so you kind of fall in out of whack of what's really important with health and fitness. And so Kathy, the strip, would have this woman, even though she was successful in her own right, but the problem was why she was perpetually single is because she wasn't she didn't have the classic looks that was attractive, and she was always struggling with her weight. And then if she would try and do something about it, she would feel bad and self-loathing. And then it was this whole running joke where she, with these aspects of eating and, ice cream, and this whole stereotype of a woman not being able to control her emotions, so she uses food as an emotional outlet to get through the day-to-day. And you see how that shapes a lot with the aspects of culture, and how stereotypes come to play with the aspects of how people are in our society. And that is something to pay attention to, how comic strips and then initially comic books really are at the focal point of that too. Now Doonesbury was really interesting because that was one of those comics that were sort of making a lot of commentary about the aspects, from what I understand, about not only being young, but being young around the baby boomer generation of youth, which was very interesting because that was the one of the, you can see this playing itself out in real time, of the aspects of what happens when you want to go away from tradition, right? Because, before, with baby boomers, generations before them, it was very prevalent that you honor traditions. But when the baby boomers started to become teenagers and then adults, they set the foundation of, well, hold on, wait just a minute. Maybe there's a different way to do something. And out of that, you got a lot of advancement in technology, a lot of means in which to make life more convenient. I mean, needless to say that wasn't happening before them, but it was more sought after in a more traditional sense where the community is more involved in having aspects about that. Now, to the negative side of it here, a really good example of that is the 60s. Now, the 60s, to a lesser to a more poignant extent here, was I think is a really good case study of the aspects of what happens when people exploit free will, and there's no sense of purpose. People are just perpetually moving, when in the counterculture was perpetually, evoking, give into your self-indulgences, right? Now, needless to say that wasn't the only thing that was going on in the 60s, because there was a lot of strive and very personal growth, and there was a lot of people doing really noble things. But at the same time, it's really interesting how these things played itself out on the other side of it, of what people want to gravitate towards as the consensus of what, particularly the era is about of the 1960s. And when we move on to the 70s and 80s and so forth, these things play themselves out of the transitioning of how people who are baby boomers were seeing their dispositions in life. When we get into the aspects of the less is more yuppie era, kind of, I want to be go and get a skill that I need. I want to go to get all the education that I have so I can have all the money that I need to to live my life the way I want to live it. And what is really interesting about the aspects of the baby boom era baby boomers is that it's very most of the time it's very transparent in the direction in which of the effect end results of what they want to achieve, versus comics were exuding this a lot, making a lot of commentary about dispositions of how things were placed and seen in a modern light. Now, when we get into, and I'll get into more specifics about this on Wednesday. Now, when we get into the issues, again, I'll reiterate this again. This isn't anything new about trying to be, people who are trying to reinvent the wheel. This is just something that's been going on since, before the Roman Empire, and then all, the dawn of man, you can pretty much say. But what the issue it was so problematic when we look at comic books that have this sort of social as they say, which really radical tyrant really mentality but they're trying to say that they are, social justice, here. What's so problematic about it is because it doesn't try and have, variations of what they think, or there's no sort of respect of trying to see things from somebody else's point of view, or trying or to over explain to somebody because they think that they're not educated enough to try and get it, or not trying to be very appreciative or respectful to the audience. And that's very off-putting, because normally somebody's not going to be interested in subject matters like that. And that's what takes away from growth when people give in to aspects like that. And it's really unfortunate, because that was showcased a lot in comic books recently, and then it flopped because, again, it's just not very cohesive for people to have really a lot of insight towards something, or to actually entertain someone. And I think that these are things that come to mind about the aspects of comics, even though, at one point in time they were seen as something that, like, this silly, kitschy thing for children. And there's a reason why comics evolved itself past that, because the people and created, they're people, but the creators who wanted to try something new, they were able to do that through comics. So with this said, that ends the first installment about my thoughts about the beginning of comic strips and everything else. And I'll wrap all this up on Wednesday. So I would like to know what you all think. Feel free to reach out to me. 2 ways to do this. Again, it's through email and then YouTube. Alright, so this reaches the end of the Harboring Light. Tune in, turn up, and absolutely take out there. Bye-bye for now.